special guests. Bear with me because there are 3 of them. Carmen Rios is the consulting digital editor at Miss and former managing digital editor for the magazine. Her writing on queerness, gender, class, and race has been published widely in print and online. She was also the producer and host of the popular feminist podcasts Propaganda and The Bossy Show. Lisa Niver is a Miss contributor and award-winning travel journalist. She is the founder and publisher of We Said Go Travel, host of the Make Your Own Map podcast, and author of Bravish, One Breakup, 6 Continents, and Feeling Fearless After 50. Nohelia Canales is a member of the Miss Committee of Scholars, a STEM educator and scholar working within higher education and the nonprofit sector, and chairperson of the Life Sciences Department at East Los Angeles College. I will go ahead and stop talking now. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to our featured guest.
Belongs to you. That's ours. Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm Carmen. Let me hold up. Thank you for being here to support 50 years of Ms., the best of the pathfinding magazine that ignited a revolution. At the office, we like to say that Ms. is more than a magazine, it's a movement, and that Gloria Steinem and the co-founders wanted a magazine that centered news and analysis around women and their lives and made a feminist worldview more accessible to the public. They launched Ms. in 1972, so we're celebrating a belated anniversary because it turns out it takes a long time to publish a book. And at the time there was a lot of growing feminist activism and demands for change. Don't know why my flashlight turned on. And I wanted to do a little scene setting. So when the first issue of Ms. hits newsstands, abortion is illegal, birth control is legal, but only married women are permitted to get prescriptions. In many states, being gay is a crime, but firing a person for becoming pregnant or sexually assaulting your spouse is not. No court had ever recognized sexual harassment in the workplace, and the EEOC had never written the words. Girls couldn't play in recreational sports leagues, women couldn't open credit card accounts on their own, and I think most surprising out of all of this to me is that in a recent CBS segment about the book, Gloria Steinem recalled that car manufacturers would not advertise in Ms. not only because they didn't want to encourage women to drive the car and didn't want to be seen encouraging women to drive the car, but felt that if women drove the cars, it would devalue them. And of course, the cherry on top, Richard Nixon was president. So for all of its 50 years, Ms. has been a touchstone for the feminist movement, reporting on the news, making the news, popularizing ideas, sparking laws and judicial changes, and even generating new vocabulary, setting trends, and launching new scholarship, always intersectional in its analysis. And so the book really shows how the movement has evolved over 50 years for women around the world. And it offers some pathways forward. So we want these events to really be about the future of Ms., what Ms. is right now, and what we can learn from this book in using it almost as a teaching text for this current extremely fraught moment. And so that's why I'm excited to be here. Thank you. It's my opening spiel. It's over now.
Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you, Lisa and Nohelia. I'm excited to be here with you. And so I want to get things started by just talking about your own Ms. stories, your own journeys to finding Ms. and to being part of the magic of Ms. And so, when and how did you first discover it? What has it meant to you as a feminist? Sort of, what has your Ms. journey been? Lisa, you could start us off.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here at Vroman's. And for me, I found Ms. in high school. So I went to all-girls high school here in Los Angeles, Westlake School for Girls. And my teacher, Joni Parker, led one of the very first women's studies programs in high school. She wrote a grant. They said that we couldn't have that program, and she said, I'll get my own money. And so in class, she brought us Ms. Magazine, and we talked about Ms. Magazine. And to be honest, I don't think I ever thought I would write for the magazine, but she used to say to us, one day when you're president of the company or the country, and we all really took that to heart, and a lot of my classmates are presidents of companies, and I did meet Carmen and write for the magazine, which was a great honor, and I did bring the magazine to my teacher. So it meant a lot to me as a feminist, as a young girl, as a woman, to be part of Ms. Magazine. It has really changed so many lives.
Hi everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here with you. I would say my journey has actually been quite different. I was raised in a very traditional Catholic home, so there was not a copy of Ms. at my house. And I went to an all-girls school, but I went to a Catholic girls' school, and no Ms. No Ms. Although I will say the nuns were quite revolutionary in their own right. But really, Ms. came into my life in college when, as the first person in my family to go to college, the first woman in my family to go to college, it really was a time of identity crisis, right? Where all of a sudden everything I thought I knew just flipped. And I'm questioning everything, pretty much. And I started finding the words for the things that I used to disagree with in Mass when the priest would ask certain questions, no disrespect to Catholics in the room. And I finally thought, wow, I'm not odd. I just have an emancipatory perspective. And I finally, in my senior year of college, is when I started organizing with Feminist Majority Foundation. And that's where I started becoming more involved with Ms. And that journey, took me to being awarded the Ms. Woman of the Year award. When I was also in the middle of an environment that was not welcoming of feminism, right? I'm a chairperson of life sciences at UCLA College. My background is in STEM. And I was at Mayo Clinic for a PhD program, and there was just not space, right? You didn't ask questions, you just needed, as my advisors used to say, focus on your science. Focus on your science. But through Ms. and through Feminist Majority Foundation, I had a lifeline. And that's what Ms. has been for me.
Oh my God, thank you. I love that. And I have some follow-up questions for both of you on these journeys. And Lisa, you referenced meeting me. I would love if you could share some of my favorite stories of how you and I met and how Ms. becomes a place where you are able to write stories that you're not able to write for other publications. And can you tell me a little bit about what those stories looked like and how they led to your own book?
Thank you. Yes, so the story that Carmen's talking about is in the time before COVID, when we used to go out more, we're happy that everyone is out again. Thank you for coming out, because we used to gather more frequently, and we're glad to see people returning. We were both supposed to go to an event with the Los Angeles Press Club, and in fact, neither of us wanted to go that night, and I would have been so happy to stay home in my pajamas. But I decided to go out, and I thought to myself, I'll go to the event, and if I just talk to one person, then I could go home. And I had been trying really hard to sell a story that was about this incredible project in Africa, where they take bicycles that people no longer want to use in America, and instead of putting the bicycles in recycling or the landfill, they ship a container full of bicycles to Africa. And they go there and they train local women to repair the bikes, to be salespeople, and the container the bikes are shipped in becomes the office. And in fact, the program is so successful, the women of the community have reordered bicycles, and now they rent the bicycles to tourists, and they sell bicycles, they fix bicycles. The bicycles are used by health professionals to treat people or bring vaccines. I thought it was an amazing story. And I was pitching a story, and everyone was like, this is not a good story. What is bad about this story? And so I'm at the event, and normally when I go to an event, I never complain. And I'm at the event, and I am complaining to this woman, and I don't know who she is, and I was like, no one wants my story. And she says, well, I like your story. I'm like, well, who are you? She's like, I'm the digital editor of Ms. Magazine. I was like, oh my goodness, it was a good day to get out of my pajamas. And she handed me her card, which had Wonder Woman on it, didn't it? Yeah. So her card has Wonder Woman, and now my car has Wonder Woman seats. I'm not saying it's only because of Carmen, but anyway, Carmen and I became friendly. She said she would buy my story, she did, and we started meeting. We went to lunch, and I would tell her what I thought were really wacky, crazy story ideas. She's like, oh, that's a good story. I was like, it is? And I would send her the story, and then she would edit it, and she would write me back. She was like, I hope you like what I did. And, oh, you took my story, and you made it sound how it should have sounded. So thank you. And then what she's referencing is over the years, I eventually wrote a book and sold it. And my book actually came out 3 weeks ago today, the same day as the Ms. Magazine book. Thank you. So the Ms. Magazine book is 50 years of Ms. And my book is I did 50 challenges before I turned 50.
And I loved it because so many of the stories in your book I remembered. If not the sort of exact story that you were telling, but just, I was like, oh yeah, I did publish a story about Lisa going here, publish a story about Lisa doing this, and so I just love that connective tissue between those two books too. And I like the idea.
Thank you.
Oh my God, thank you. And I like the idea of Ms. becoming, because that's obviously such a big part of what Ms. is, right? It's a place where we tell stories that the mainstream media is glossing over, that don't have enough conflict or blood to sell in big press, and that focus on solutions and women's real lives around the world. Nohelia, when you talked about finding a vocabulary in Ms. on a college campus, that's how I discover Ms. too, is I actually choose to go to American University because it is simply the first school I visited where there was a feminist group tabling handing out free issues of Ms. And I was like, well, if I'm gonna get 4 of those a year, then sign me up. So I would love to, if you could talk about the others, now that you're on the Committee of Scholars, which for folks who don't know is a committee of Ms. that is both an advisory board and I would say, an inspiration and a content generation space for us where we can have scholars bringing their scholarship to the pages of Ms. and also helping us tell the important stories and the stories in the right way that we need to tell them. And so now that you're on the other side of that, that sort of collegiate and academic side of Ms., can you talk a little bit about what makes it, how that shapes Ms. and why it's such a vital part of what Ms. is to have that Committee of Scholars?
So I really see the Committee of Scholars existing in a space of collaboration. I think that, we're all coming from all different schools, different, perspectives. I teach at community college, so it's a different perspective than some of my committee members who are at big 4-year universities, right? And what I have found is that what we can do as a Committee of Scholars is dismantle the ivory tower of academia, right? Because so much of the work that happens, quote unquote, in academia inherently was structured to be up here, right? Like, oh, they're the super smart people, right? And the community, though, is what Ms. is about, right? Ms. has given voice historically to stories and experiences that no one else would, right? So it makes absolute sense to me when I see the work and the voices that the Ms. Committee of Scholars brings, that what we're doing is creating a connection between community and academia. It shouldn't be academia telling community, it should be a community informing. And so we all are coming from our various spaces and able to dialogue and share and bring different perspectives that then we can, through the platform that is Ms., be able to collaborate and, just have an impact that through the Ms. in the classroom, where we're using Ms. in our various spaces, we can bring more the next generation and the generation after that into the dialogue.
Thank you. Yes, because Ms. is now a teaching text, being taught in high school classrooms and college classrooms on a range of issues, women's studies, but also in other specialties. And so, that's a new space of discovery too for students, is to have their first brush with Ms. in the classroom. And you touched on something too, this idea of collaboration, dialogue. Something that I found really incredible when I was reading through the book for the first time is just that in these early articles in particular, we hear so many unnuanced stories about feminism 50 years ago. And it was fascinating to really see how feminists were able to use Ms. to engage with each other across lines of race and class and sexuality and geography, to share their stories, to sort of tell each other how they could be better allies and accomplices to one another, to just shine a light on their own experiences and the ways that different policies are shaping their lives. And I loved the sense of good faith that you see there. You see women of such different experience and background just coming to this place and knowing that the people they're talking to are their people, right? That they feel they're able to be vulnerable and that they feel comfortable, challenging each other and just talking to each other in an honest way. And, intersectionality is a buzzword now, but of course, Ms. was right here putting it into practice 50 years ago on these pages. And I'm curious, as an academic, how you feel, Nohelia, about where Ms. fits in an intersectional feminist movement right now.
I think that Ms., one thing that is really important in intersectional work is being able to own, right, own the structures that allow certain voices to be published and others not. And Ms. in an intersectional space is doing the work of saying feminism needs to be inclusive, right? We need to make sure that we're representing all the various experiences that women and queer folks have. And also in the intersectional space, I think there's also a piece of it that is reflective, because we have to grapple with, right, the history of feminism and bringing more, women of color, of all backgrounds into that space. And that is hard work. And one thing is, I have found in the Ms. space, to be intersectional, you have to do the work. And that is something where we can do that in Ms. with the committee of scholars, with the various authors that we have who contribute. But it's a constant, you can't stop doing the work. And Ms. is like a living expression of that work.
It's very beautiful.
Absolutely, yes. Feminism is a verb. Yes.
That's right.
And Lisa, I feel like I always find your background really fascinating, because you came to Ms. after having and still being in spaces that are not so much centrally oriented around feminism. Not that they're anti-feminist, but just that you're writing for travel publications and doing broadcast journalism with more mainstream media outlets. And we're in this moment where feminism feels very mainstreamed, right? We see the word everywhere. It's on glossy magazines, it's in newspapers, and yet it still feels like there's something so critical about having a dedicated feminist platform like Ms. So I'm curious if you could just speak a little bit to, what unique role you think Ms. and feminist journalism have right now.
I think it's incredible we've made progress. But at the same time, when I was talking to someone about media and broadcast and travel, and wanting to have my own travel channel, I have a YouTube channel and I'm just this smidge close to 2 million views on YouTube. And my friend Adam that's here helped me film one of my very, very first videos. And he and my dad both remark when I say that I haven't gotten there yet, like, remember when you only had 100 views and you were so excited? And in fairness, I was so excited. But you look at the media and there's often a whole table full of people and there's one space for a woman. Or I was at an event recently and they were showing films of different people that had been in Ireland taking trips and sharing. And I was like, oh look, I know him, that white man and that white man and that white man. I was like, wait, what about somebody else? And so it is still not quite there yet. I know when I was in college, I did also study women's studies, and I remember we would talk a lot about race and class and culture. And it was very different than any other class. And during COVID, I had the opportunity to study at UCLA. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Senior Scholars Program at UCLA, but if you're not, you should sign up because it's $150 and it's amazing for each class. But one of the things that was most amazing to me, and the thing that I realized taking these classes, is that race and class and culture and socioeconomic status, were in every single class I took. I took a geography class and they talked about it. I took a film producing class and they talked about it. And for me, that seemed like such a huge difference from when I was a college student at 18, 19, 20 to when I was during COVID home, not traveling and taking class asynchronous on my laptop. That it had really shifted. And I think that we owe a lot of that to Ms. Magazine and the scholars, that there are more women and people are willing to say, hey, this isn't right. We need to be more inclusive and we need to change this.
I love it. Definitely true. Yes. Definitely more women at Ms. than at many other media outlets. Practicing some matriarchy at Ms. Magazine. And I'm curious too, we've talked a little bit about how you all have shaped Ms. and how Ms. has shaped the world, but I'm curious from a personal perspective just how being, having Ms. as a tool in a personal way, but being involved with Ms. has shaped, your scholarship and sort of shaped the story that you were getting ready to tell about your own life.
That's an awesome question. Because I just recently joined the board of directors for Planned Parenthood of Pasadena and San Gabriel Valley.
Yes.
And I was sharing with Carmen that I was, coming back from a board summit. So it's my first, board summit, and I let everyone know I've got to go. Can we go over to Ms. And as I'm listening to the work that we need to do, right, at a time when our humanity has been stripped from us with Dobbs. I see the intersection of personal stories and experiences. One of the things we were talking about, right, is the work of justice, of reproductive justice, of how do we create community and help people realize, right, this fraught time that we're in, right? How does it truly impact? And as I was reflecting on, I shared a very personal story about my first pregnancy, and it was an ectopic pregnancy, and the doctor didn't listen to me, right? And I almost died because he didn't listen. As my fallopian tube ruptured, and I was bleeding internally, and I'm the one who took myself to the emergency room. As I'm sharing that story with my group, I remember that it was folks that I knew at Ms. who I reached out to when afterwards. The community that is created of, amongst all of us here, right, where we see the critical role that work like Ms. Magazine, that work like organizations, Planned Parenthood and others, that do to not just uplift larger social issues, right? But those social issues are really about us, right? And I feel like that's the personal part of Ms. that I knew that the experiences that I've had or that, you know, other folks in the communities that I'm a part of have had, Ms. has provided the space to be able to speak to those experiences, the painful and beautiful and all of it in between. So that's something that I was actually thinking about right now at the board summit, how the 50 years of Ms., right, is so much more than the words on the pages, right? It's the people behind those. So I feel that's the big personal part of it for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we're glad you're okay, because that's a harrowing story.
Yeah, no, there's, and it's Ms. who has done work around really making sure that people know, right, that the United States has the worst maternal mortality of any quote-unquote developed country, right? I don't like that word. But that is horrific, right? And I don't understand how that's not, you know, blasting from signs everywhere in neon letters. And there's the space that Ms. provides and the Board of Scholars and Ms. in the classroom, right? I'll put my hat on as a teacher, where it resonates so much for me, Lisa, where you were talking about the classroom and how the space for discussing race and socioeconomic status, gender, all of these, right? But we don't do that in science. We don't do that in science. And then we see the kinds of scientists and, you know, that come out of academia, right? And why it's so important to have women and communities of color in these spaces to become healthcare professionals. And that Ms. is one of the vehicles that I've used to transform my own teaching, so that when I teach reproductive physiology, I'm not just teaching a cascade of hormonal events and all of these different things, but infusing it with the stories from Ms. Telling my students, so you're a future nurse practitioner, doctor, respiratory therapist, wherever you're gonna be, right? We're going to meet people from all different walks of life. And so the vocabulary, the language, being able to speak to and understand what that person is bringing to that space with you is so much more critical, so that you can have community that continues to feel like they can access care, right? And that's one of the ways that I really feel strongly that, you know, we can take Ms. into spaces that we usually don't, right? And that's one of the most exciting things for me anyways, also as in my new role as department chair, is changing the curriculum little by little. Yep.
Doing God's work.
Revolution starts one curriculum outline at a time.
Yes, thank you for doing that.
Well, one of the ways that I feel like Ms. has changed what I've done, and definitely in the classroom, and we share Planned Parenthood. I had a brief stay in medical school, and when I went on leave from medicine, I actually worked for Planned Parenthood. And it is an incredible place. One of the things though that really was a highlight for me was I got to represent Ms. Magazine at the United Nations General Assembly. and because of Carmen. And it was so incredible to walk into a place. I'd done Model United Nations in high school, and to walk into the UN building, and overhead they said the Security Council is now in session. And all I could think was, oh, Dorothy, we're not in Kansas anymore. But it was incredible to be at the UN Women meeting, and I was happy to be there, and it was a great honor. But I have to be honest, sometimes now when the UN Women sends me an email that's an embargoed message, oftentimes it'll say, we have a report coming out about what it's like for girls and women in a war zone. And this information is embargoed, you can't use it. And I will call Carmen and I say, do we need to do a study to prove that war is bad for girls and women? I'm like, thank you. You know, I've had several of them come through about Afghanistan, and sadly I know the next one will come about Israel. And it's a terrible, tragic thing. And you know, Ms. is a place where we can talk about it, and the UN Women, we were at a meeting and they were talking about who was going to host the next meeting. The meeting I was at was 25 years since the Beijing meeting, which was a big meeting to talk about how are things. And this meeting was, wow, 25 years later, not so different. And for a lot of people, and one of the questions was, who can host? Is it okay for a host country to be hosting the UN Women when their practices don't support women? Are we going to gather all of these countries to talk about what is it like for women in your country in a place where women can't drive? Women can't go out without a male relative. They don't have a husband, they have to go with a brother. Their lives are small. They are not allowed to have education. So we've made progress in certain ways, but sometimes we have to remember there's so much further that we have to go.
Thank you. And tell me about the book too. Like, how did writing for Ms. change? Did it change the trajectory that your book took? The way you told your own story and some of the stories that are in here?
Well, I do often say when Carmen isn't sitting next to me, so it's kind of funny to see it next to Carmen, I do say that writing for Ms. Magazine is one of the reasons that I have a traditionally published book. So we could give Carmen a round of applause. That's my book. Thank you, Carmen. But I do think that it isn't so easy. Every time I'm at a literary conference or a writing workshop, basically someone asks a question and say, I want to sell a memoir, and everyone says, oh, memoir, it's very hard to sell. I don't think so. And I sit in a lot of those meetings, I'm like, I sold a memoir. And so definitely, one of the things that made a huge difference for me was writing for Ms. Magazine, which allowed me to write for a lot of other places. I've written for the last 12 years for the Jewish Journal. That has made a big difference. And going to different workshops and meetings and writing for other people, I've written for Wired and Smithsonian, and I sold a story. Susan Bajekin's here. She's the one that sent me to the Solomon Islands. We worked very hard on this story about the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Guadalcanal. And so each building block helped, one small step on another small step, and a lot of rejections. A lot of people told me no. In fact, for the Smithsonian story, they said they had bought it, then they changed the editor, then they didn't have it. So I sold a story the Saturday Evening Post with one of my dad's patients. He's here. And my dad said to me, would it help you if you could talk to a soldier that was at the battle? I'm like, yeah, it would help me, but the battle was 75 years ago. Do you know someone? Said, oh yeah, a patient came in yesterday. He was there. Yes, please, I'd like to talk to him. So, one of the things that got me the book was I went out and I met Carmen and we made friends and we kept working together, and a lot of the stories in my book, the 50 things that I did, and a lot of the press that I've had since the book's come out in the last 3 weeks, I've been interviewed in Bloomberg and Business Insider. I was on Good Day DC and Good Day LA. A lot of those things happened because I knew someone, and then they introduced me to someone, and it turns out I used to tell my students when I taught science that it was much more important to be kind than smart. In fairness, it's probably better to be both. But I told them it's better to be both. But the person sitting next to you that you're leaving out of your group, who knows who that person's going to be someday? Be nice to them. and that we have to help each other. And that's really how I believe I have this book, is that I helped people and they helped me, and I told stories and I listened and I tried, and honestly I just never gave up. One of my editors told me she knows the title of my next book. It's called Relentless. She said, that's what you are, it's relentless.
That's right. It's a good thing to be.
Well, I think it's going to be called Relentless, and then the subtitle, but in a good way.
Yes. That's awesome.
Okay, and so when we think about the future then of Ms., from this really front moment we're in to whatever has to come next, you know, I think a lot about the sort of the history of Ms., that in our very first issue we ran this groundbreaking campaign, We Have Had Abortions, where more than 50 prominent women signed their names. They were confessing to a crime by signing this manifesto. And the Washington Post, of course 50 years later, said that the petition had changed the course of the abortion rights movement by making visible the women who had abortions, by making visible what is not visible, what is invisible. And when I think about that, I think about the fact that, you know, that is what Ms. has always done, right? Popularized vocabulary and invented it, commissioned groundbreaking studies on things we already know are happening, but now we have numbers on them, and just always push the needle for women and girls. And so I'm curious what both of you think in this moment, sort of what needs to come next and what lessons we need to take from these last 50 years of Ms., of feminist movement building, to fuel that feminist fight forward.
Another excellent question. You know, and I think about that a lot now that, you know, I am a mother to 2 boys, right? And I grew up in a family of all sisters and now all boys in my house. And I asked myself, you know, when we look at the, you know, next 50 years, how Ms. plays a role, right? I'll start with just having conversations with my sons at a very young age, questioning quote unquote gender norms. No, you don't have to play that sport. You can walk around with your book and just read and sit quietly. No, you don't need to be playing rough, quote unquote, in the playground. You have 50 years of stories, right, where we've upended, right, what quote unquote the stereotypes are in terms of gender and what we can and can't do. And I think that for me, putting on, you know, as a parent, I'm able to bring out my old Ms. magazines. Now my oldest son just turned 13. I can't even believe that. And my youngest is 9. But my 13-year-old is just started middle school. We all remember middle school. And one of the things that, you know, I shared with him is some of my Ms. magazines, like that I call them my archives. I keep all of my, you know, past issues of Ms. And I share them with him and you know, with also my youngest, but really with, you know, as he's journeying into middle school, and when he saw me crying when the Dobbs decision came out, right? I was explaining to him what just happened, right? And his response was, but why are they making decisions like that? We're all human beings and have the right to make our own decisions. I don't understand. What is wrong? And then we talked about the patriarchy. So this is where I see the future, right? It's like what I was mentioning before about stories and that individual experience. I see that in, 50 years when my boys are hopefully, they're off doing, amazing things and they've had a very fruitful life. They've shared the same passing down of the revolution, as I tell my partner. He's, we're in this together, and it starts with each one of us. So that's how I've really taken this now as a mother, right? How does this impact that next, generation? So thank you, Ms., because it really helped when I was having when I've been and continue to have conversations with my boys.
One of the things I think about with the next 50 years, like you're talking about, is working with students. And I taught physics and chemistry in Culver City at Culver City Middle School. And at the time, for March, for Women's History Month, I worked on a project with the English teacher. And together we made this corridor. And the students worked in English and in science and in the computer lab, and we made these posters about different female scientists. And at the beginning, everybody told me, this is not a good project. We're never gonna make this happen. I was like, what is the big deal? We're gonna research people, we're working together. Like, oh, we can't do this, all these different classes. I was like, whatever, it'll be what it'll be. This is what I'm doing. Anyway, it turned out so fantastic. The other grades, the other teachers brought their students essentially on a field trip to our corridor. And I think that's what I see for the future, is that it shouldn't be so hard to work together. That if we're going to have, at one school I did a mom's career day, and all the moms came in and talked about their careers, and it was so fascinating to me. Some of the moms were currently working, some of the moms used to work, some of them didn't, but no matter what they did, whatever choice they made, everybody felt guilty. Everybody was worried what someone else was thinking about their choice. And it was universal. They used to come into my classroom to help. I was taught in elementary school at Curtis and at Vroman, and everybody was like, oh, they don't like me because I'm a stay-at-home mom, they don't like me because I don't stay at home. I was like, nobody doesn't like you. Like, you're not in third grade, you're the parent. But it was so interesting, like, to see the children. One of the moms had brought her Emmy in, and the child didn't believe that her mom had been on TV. I was like, oh, okay, you guys have some work to do at home. But I think that collaboration is something that we look forward to in Ms. Magazine, and that somehow that's still challenging, for sure in schools and in workplaces. How do we support each other, and how do we tell our personal stories, whether it's I almost died and no one listened to me, or I'm going through a hard time, I'm getting divorced, or I need to change jobs, or any of those things. I hope through Ms. Magazine and in the future that it's easier to have those courageous conversations where we share where we're really at and where we want to go.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. I want to open it up to Q&A, so a big round of applause for our panelists. And I think I saw Nayereh come in. Hello. Okay, so Nayereh is here. She is on our Ms. Committee of Scholars and Professor Emerita and former chair of Gender and Women's Studies and the founding director of the Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at California State University, Northridge. Thank you for being here. And I know, should we? Nayereh, do you want to grab your seat for Q&A? We saved it for you. We saved you a spot. Yeah. Come on down. Come on down.
I think there are chairs for questions.
Over here?
There.
Right here.
There's a chair.
And I don't know, I think we're just on our own.
Oh, for what?
So So I guess if people have, do we have a running mic or do people just, okay.
We'll repeat the question.
Yeah. Does anyone want to get us started? Burning questions? Who's going to be the brave first person to ask?
Or maybe they just want to sign books. Or maybe we should ask you questions.
Oh my god, don't do that. Want to get your revenge? Because I
No, I like to. Maybe people want to know, where is Ms. Magazine going to be next? Or what's the rest on the tour?
Well, we do have an event coming up later this month in the LA area on October 29th at the Skirball Cultural Center. And so that'll be on a Sunday, and it's an all day, well, not all day, it's 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., but I mean, it's a school day. And it should be really great. It's gonna have lots of little feminist workshops and some great speakers, so be sure to save the date for that. And I should add that if you scan the QR code on the bookmarks that I left on the seats, there you can get a free year of Ms. And there's also a petition linked on there right underneath that you can sign to show your support for the Equal Rights Amendment. And I also want to mention that Lisa's book is also being sold downstairs, right near the shelf where you can find a copy of this one if you haven't purchased it yet. Okay, have I already preemptively answered all the questions? Does anyone else have a question?
So we can buy that volume today?
Yes, this one's right downstairs next to the staircase on this side, closer to the front door.
People already have bought it.
I know, I see a lot of people already found that station. And there's some paperbacks like right across the way. And Lisa's book is in that stack too. So we'll be able to sign, Lisa can sign both while you're here. All right, do you guys just want to get to the signing? Any questions?
Questions? Anything you want to see in Ms? Anything?
Oh, yeah, let's see. Yeah, we'd like to ask you a question. What would you like to see next in Ms.?
Oh,
I
yes.
don't have a question, but I have an experience that people might be interested in.
Okay.
1975 was the year of the woman. I was working for the Department of Defense in Korea. And to celebrate the year of the woman, all of those of us who were working in various jobs decided to have someone come and have a celebration. So Letty Cotton Pograven agreed to come, and she came with her husband. And of course, she was the visiting fireman. And the visiting firemen are usually men, but her husband was the spouse. So it a lot of changes, and what do you take a male spouse to entertain him while his wife is giving her conversations and talks. And she went all over Korea and talked at various posts of what we owned and what we were doing over there. Thank you very much. And I'll never forget one of the men we met, one of the generals who was running one of the venues at which we were speaking. He said, I want you to know there's a lot of talk in the Army that we don't support women and don't support women working. And he said, there isn't a man who went through World War II who doesn't support women working. Because we saw their husbands get killed on foreign beaches, and they had to have a job. They might get some money from the government, but they had to have a job. So he was a great supporter, he said, of the feminist movement and women working.
Wow, thank
You heard it here first.
you. I know. I think we need that story.
Radicalizing the military since 1975. Thank you
I
for
have a
sharing that.
question, because I'm, a travel publicist. What has your interaction been at the countries that you have visited? And you've visited how many countries now?
Thank you, Susan. 102. She's asking how many countries have I been to?
Certainly the countries that I handle public relations for, like the Solomon Islands and Fiji Islands, women are, they're not where they should be. Can you comment on that? And what, because I think this whole discussion this evening opened my eyes, and I feel like I should do more than just, get travelers to come to Fiji and the Solomon Islands and not just be a travel publicist. I should go to the countries that I represent for years, and, you know, make a difference in these women's lives, and tell them they can instead of they can't. And now that's, you know, I don't know what my clients will think, but, you know, the Intercontinental in Fiji has a whole sustainability program. It's huge. They have like 20 different initiatives that, and nothing wrong with sustainability, it's fabulous, but, you know, there's not enough, you know, I think there should be initiatives for women as well. What are your thoughts? Maybe going over there, maybe helping me.
I love this idea. So Susan is a publicist who I've worked with on many travel stories, and she's asking what's it like for women in other places, and how do we make a difference? And I agree with you that we have a lot of projects in tourism, a lot talks about sustainability. And one of the things that I often talk to people about and tell them the story I want to tell is about women's empowerment or different things about the culture. So when I was in the Solomon Islands, I got to watch, there's a special thing called shell money. They make money from the shells, and it's a currency, and it's involved a lot of times with a bride and exchange, like many cultures have that. So they let me participate, and it turns out I'm not such a great artisan of shell money. It had a lot of steps, and they laughed at me. There's definitely a video of that. But one of the things that I do believe that is very important to look at, how are the dynamics. One of the things when you're visiting another person's culture and country, you have to be sensitive to how is it. I've traveled several times with a friend of mine, and when I was with him in Palau, we went scuba diving, which was amazing, and then the next day when I went on a cultural tour, he went to the government, and he was lobbying about the sodomy laws that gay couples don't feel comfortable going there because they can end up in jail or worse. And so there are different ways in different countries to share how do we feel and how can we help and look for ways to empower women. In honesty, there are a lot of women in hotels and in PR, and it's a great project. I vote for you.
I would love to hear Nayereh's take on this too, of sort of like what solidarity and transnational feminist solidarity can look like in like a culture where we are often traveling and visitors in other people's countries. Well, how can we sort of engage in that way?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because it depends on what region, what country you're talking about, and how different the culture, background, level of development, organization, whether what are the status of women, what kind of what's the literacy rates, for example, very simple things. So I have been to many countries too, third world, first world, second world, meaning the Soviet bloc. I was a Fulbright scholar in the former Soviet Union during the perestroika glasnost time. So I witnessed the second revolution in my life, one in Iran, which we got rid of the Shah, the dictator, modern dictator, but replaced it with a terrible, much worse system of government, a theocracy. But that's another story. So having experienced that, I was in the first Fulbright scholar, the last Fulbright scholar in the Soviet Union, and the first Fulbright scholar in the new independent republics in the Muslim majority region, which is called Central Asia and the Caucasus. So I did a lot of traveling. I ended up staying there for a long time because I worked for UNICEF and UNDP for the UN as consultant, and did a lot of field work and study from scratch. There was nothing about women that could be reliable, no reliable statistics, because the Soviet statistics were mostly propaganda, mostly not really reliable. So we did a lot of work in different rural areas, in cities, And things were very different, you know, in rural areas versus urban centers, metropolitan cities like Baku, where I was staying for most of the time. But there was also, Baku was the capital city of, was and still is, of the Republic of Azerbaijan, which is Muslim majority. But even their Islam and their religion was so different from what I was raised to know, because they lived under an atheist communist regime. So religion was something kind of underground, and it was now becoming on the surface. And so a lot of things I learned there. Don't let me start because I have written extensively on that. But one thing that it was a turning point for me intellectually and emotionally, everything, because they were also in war. They had inter-ethnic conflict, which was not actually ethnic conflicts. It was a conflict over territory between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So I went to both countries, and it was very hard to build a women's network for peace, and we did that. That was one of the things I was doing there among Armenian, Azerbaijani, and Georgian women, because Georgia, another republic in the Caucasus, was involved in kind of mediating between these two warring countries. So therefore, being culturally sensitive, but also being at a time that politically was very tense, and traveling was not that safe for especially women, but fortunately I had no bad experience, because always, you know, we were together, several of us, with men accompanying us. So I learned a lot of things. I learned from that, living there for a year and then going back and forth working with the UN, was that women were the primary keeper of the tradition, of their culture, vis-a-vis the Sovietization or Russianization of those countries, which was kind of a mixed blessing for women, because they had to play that role. Not that they necessarily wanted, but they were expected to be very retain some traditional, which were usually patriarchal and sexist reminiscence of old days, vis-a-vis the communist theory of egalitarian, way of life. But it was, and I learned, I was already critical of the Soviet version of socialism, but I learned that the promise of socialism for equality was how can I put it in a polite way? It was a sham. It was just on paper. They were still very sexist. Unfortunately, men and women had kind of socialized that too, internalized that, and racist too. So having lived in America, they couldn't believe when I was saying that, no, this is very patriarchal thing. So how is that in the United States? Is that any better? So sometimes, if you talk to, of course I said about the shortcomings here and the problems here as well, but there were many things that I had to be very careful. How to talk about even the United States, not to appear as a CIA agent, or because people still were, it was, the influence of the Soviet time. Somebody from America comes in that country and speaks their language, because my first mother language is Turkish, Azerbaijani Turkish, because Iran has a lot of Azerbaijanis. So I knew that language. I just hadn't practiced it much, but I grabbed it in a month. So they said, okay, so they have sent us somebody who knows our native language, so it was kind of suspicious, but I wanted to go there, nobody sent me there. Anyway, so it's a difficult question, but I learned a lot about building transnational feminist network even despite all the challenges. And feminism was a new word there, even the word gender was a new word, because I was teaching at the pedagogical institute there. I was actually, they always told me that you were the one who introduced us to feminism and to genders. Initially, they made it, mistook it with a term in Turkish Azeri, which meant a bad thing. So that's why it was even harder to establish that term in a positive way. Anyway, so yeah, it's a challenge, but it's doable. You need to learn and you need to experience it through experimenting.
Can I share
Sure.
just briefly? We lived in the Philippines for 2 years, and I'm originally from Nicaragua, and Nicaragua continues to be an awful place for women and girls. And one thing I would encourage as we, our world, it just gets smaller and smaller, right? With social media, with all of these different ways that we can connect that we couldn't before, right? You had to hop on an airplane and off you went. I think one really important thing to remember when we're in other spaces is to be very conscious of what are the traditions and norms of the communities that, and also being aware of our own colonialist legacies, right? Because we want to be a force for positive change, but in many of these spaces, like in the Philippines, you have the revolutionaries, you have spaces where people have been organizing little by little. So I would always say it's coming from a place of humility and a place of service, and always with an ear to, I'm here to listen, right? And that's how I think we can build community to build change.
Thank you so much. An excellent question. And now I think we should probably start signing these books so that we can get everyone out here before the store closes.
And we just want to say thank you to everyone.
And thank you, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.